justice system and provides recommendations to the General Assembly. The Council shall actively review the implementation of all juvenile justice reforms enacted by the General Assembly, collect and review performance measurement data, and continue to review the juvenile justice system for changes that improve public safety, hold youth accountable, provide better outcomes for children and families, and control juvenile justice costs. There is an item in your folder that the AOC, there's two items, that the AOC asked that we distribute related to House Bill 3 and then a report as well. So those will be distributed during our meeting if they haven't been already. So going back to the agenda, we have Department of Juvenile Justice updates, and Commissioner Vicki Reed, who's also a member, and Secretary Carrie Harvey. You're here and you're ready to go this morning, so we apologize for the delay. Patience is a virtue, as I've found out during my service here in Frankfort. So the floor is yours, and if you'll introduce yourselves for the record, you can begin your presentation.
I'm Carrie Harvey, Secretary of the Justice and Public Safety Cabinet.
Vicki Reed, Commissioner of the Kentucky Department of Juvenile Justice.
You can proceed.
Well, I think just as a prefatory remark, for many of you, the ground we'll cover today will be old news. A lot of this will be information you've heard before, but we'll start. Commissioner Reed will just give you an overview of the Department of Juvenile Justice, the facilities it operates, the children that it serves. And then I'll go through some of the changes and improvements we've made over probably the last 8, 10, or 12 months, and much of that dovetails with House Bill 3 and Senate Bill 162, and so we'll be able to provide hopefully a useful update about where we stand with implementation of not only the governor's plan, but those important pieces of legislation. So I'll turn it over to Commissioner Reed.
And I do promise to keep it quick because I know a lot of you all are pretty familiar, but sometimes it's good to touch base and do a little bit of reminding. So we operate 29 facilities across Kentucky. We have 8 secure juvenile detention centers, mostly with pre-adjudicative youth awaiting trial, 7 youth development centers, and the numbers you see are as of 5/23, so we updated from the last time there. 8 group homes and 5 DJJ operated day treatment centers, and we're really known for our statewide system. In addition to those 5 that we personally operate, we have another 18 that we contract, and we're getting to ready to add a new one down towards the western part of the state. So that will bring our number up to 19. And just so you have an idea on that, that is 1,247 unduplicated kids that we served in day treatment in the year before. The numbers for this year will come out at the end of the school year, and we expect that number to rise significantly because some of this was still virtual and other things going on with the pandemic. So we'll have a higher number of youth that were in our day treatment centers. We also had 268 kids in alternatives to detention. And I think you've heard me say before, it's something I'm very proud of. There is no other state in the nation that operates the continuum that we do for kids: foster care, emergency shelter, mentoring, home incarceration, electronic monitoring, wraparound in-home services. And I think that's something important to realize too. Is in addition to the other things we do a lot of prevention and early intervention work. We also distribute grants to local communities. One other part of us maybe you don't hear too much about is Interstate Compact. We have one of the most active ones. We're bordered by 7 states. Last year, we returned more runaways than any other state in the nation. We supervise youth that are coming in from other states and make sure that we return them. I think last year we returned, 147, I think it was, to other youth. So that's another division that you don't hear too much about. Juvenile justice is always evolving. I've been doing this work for many, many years, and I've seen, the ebb and flow of things. Certainly, we still have some low-level kids. We still get status offenders in our facility. But over the past decade, our population has really changed. I think a lot of that, and you can see some of the numbers on here, was driven in part by Senate Bill 200's implementation, which is what it set out to do. And I would be remiss if I not do a shout out and credit to our friends at AOC with the court designated worker and the great diversion programs that they operate across the state. And I don't think any other state in the nation does what our court designated worker program does too. So that helps, also in keeping the numbers and so forth. Oops, went too far. In check. Oh, well, we skipped one. So our total felonies increased from 42.9 in 2012 to 72% in 2023. Our capital offenses went from 22.8 to 37.9, and our non-felonies decreased from 57.1 to 28%. So that's a substantial reduction, and that's how it should be. We need to save our detention beds, our most expensive beds, and the most needed for kids who truly, really need to be there. So that's where we are with that. So I'm going to stop at this point.
What I propose to do is just to run through again some of the areas that we have tried to attack and improve over the last several months. As everyone knows, there have been issues in many of the detention facilities. These issues are not new. They didn't just occur in the last year, but I think there are a number of factors that have exacerbated those issues. We've tried to address the primary causative agents of the issues that we've encountered, and I'll tell you how we've done that. Again, it dovetails with much of the legislation that was passed in the most recent session of the General Assembly, and we very much appreciated what I think was a good collaborative dialogue with Senator Carroll and Representative Bratcher and the other leaders on that effort, and I think we ended up with certainly significant legislative improvements. The overarching difficulty, I think, that has existed in the detention centers, not over the last year, but over the last many years, and it was identified publicly as certainly as early as 2017, was the inability to recruit and retain a sufficient staff for these facilities. And I think we could all agree that if we don't properly staff these facilities, the rest of your plan just really doesn't matter very much, because it's not going to work if you don't have the right people and the right numbers of people. It comes down not exclusively, but largely to an issue of compensation. As recently as 2 years ago, the starting pay for a frontline worker in a juvenile detention facility was $30,000 a year. I mean, we all know you're not going to hire people to do those jobs at that level of compensation. So that was a problem that we started to attack, at least early on in my tenure at the cabinet. In December of 2021, Governor Beshear announced that we would provide 10% raises for all security positions at the Department of Juvenile Justice. Now, to be honest with you, that I think that may have helped us some with retention, but we did not see much of an uptick in recruitment from that increase. Because again, 10% of $30,000 is frankly not a lot. In July of 22, the General Assembly enacted a budget that provided for a very generous 8% increase for all state employees, including our DJJ security workers. Again, we did not see a great uptick in interest in these jobs from that. So as we entered into October of 2022, we realized that we still had a very critical staffing shortage. We had, I think maybe about 60 of these jobs were vacant across our 8 facilities. And so we cobbled together through some reprogramming some funds in the department, some additional raises, largely in the that took the form of premium pay for shift premiums and locality differentials, so that we could attack the greatest areas of need. And after we did those October raises, we started to see some modest improvement. It was not great, but I think we saw some modest improvement. And then in February of this year, Governor Beshear raised the starting salaries for these frontline workers, corrections officers, to $50,000 a year. And the General Assembly appropriated sufficient funds to make those salary increases permanent, which we appreciate very much, and also appropriated money to provide similar increases for Department of Corrections, correctional officers, which is very necessary. These shortages don't just exist in DJJ. There are also critical staffing shortages in DOC, and of course these are essential jobs to public safety. So 2 years ago, the starting pay at DJJ detention centers for correctional officers was $30,000 a year. Today, it's $50,000 a year, and I'm happy to report that we are seeing positive returns for that investment. As you can see from the slide, on January 1st, we had 313 correctional officers. That has now increased to 349. And in some ways, the news is really better than that, because we not only have that increase in hired staff, we actually have applications in the pipeline now. And that's something that we just did not see before. We had experiences often where we would put out registers and have zero applicants for these jobs. And now at every location, we do have a number of applicants, and in many of our locations, the interest is quite high. We continue to have trouble with staffing in Campbell County in northern Kentucky, which is not surprising given the economic circumstances. Of course, every labor market is local and every labor market is different, and labor markets change all the time. And we also have difficulty, probably not quite as much as Campbell, but Jefferson County is going to be stubborn in terms of staffing. And again, you're talking about local economic conditions that affect that, I suspect, more than anything else. But we have seen improvement, and that has been enormously helpful. Now, we're not where we need to be, and one of the things that, of course, we're going to struggle with for a while is, even though we have more staff, we have a very inexperienced staff, because in going back for many years, and again, this was identified at least as early as 2017, the turnover in these jobs was just tremendous. But I think that we're on the right track. As we went through this process, we also conducted kind of a ground-up review of what we thought we needed. I mean, these facilities sort of had on paper a certain staffing complement. I'm not exactly sure where that came from. You know, there are PREA ratios, there are other ratios that may have been borrowed from. But what we did is we went out and asked the people who are running these facilities, how many people do you need to run a safe and secure facility? And based on that, we requested additional funding to hire more detention staff, and thankfully the General Assembly appropriated that funding. So we think the staffing, the future of staffing, sure looks a lot better than it did a couple of years ago. And again, I think we would all agree that having a well-trained, well-equipped staff is fundamental to anything else you do. We can talk about programming, we can talk about treatment. All of those things are things that all of us believe in and we all want to do, but none of that happens if you don't have a safe and secure facility. And you don't have a safe and secure facility if you don't have sufficient numbers of properly equipped, properly trained staff. So staffing is fundamental. Senate Bill 162 also included recruitment initiatives. It created what I think would be analogous to the Trooper R program that the Kentucky State Police operates. We're in the process of implementing that program, and it'll be modeled after the KSP Trooper R program. Senate Bill 162 also provided the department with a limited duration program to give us a chance to recruit back people who had recently left the department. And many of them probably left strictly for economic reasons, and now our economic picture has changed a little bit. And so we have reached out to a lot of employees that have left the department in recent times, and we've had about 10 who have expressed interest thus far. And that may not sound like a lot, but that can make a really a significant difference, because most of these are small facilities, and the sensitivity to what might seem like relatively small changes in staffing is very acute. So adding 2 or 3 people in a facility that are already trained, that have some experience, that can make quite a positive difference. So we appreciate that opportunity. Moving beyond staffing, we also, over the last 10, 12 months, have done a lot of work in revamping security policies, security protocols, just how we do business. At Governor Beshear's directive, in December of 2022, for the first time, we separated males from females, and we created an all-female facility in Campbell County. And in January of 2023, we separated male juveniles by security level. Juveniles that were charged with a Class C felony or above were put in what we call high-security facilities, which currently is Adair County, Fayette County, and Warren County, and the lower level offenders by allegation are in the lower level classification facilities. Now, before we did that, and this has always been the case since the department was created in Kentucky, there's been a little confusion about this from time to time, but it was always the case that boys and girls were housed together, and it was always the case that very serious offenders were housed with offenders who were not so serious. So you could have, and we probably did have, literally, a juvenile charged with murder in a cell next to a juvenile who was a school truant. So that is no longer the case. Now, the system that prevailed in Kentucky for all those years, as I understand it, is actually how most states in the country do it. It doesn't make it good or bad, but it is how it was always done in Kentucky. I think the changing times and the changing population dictated that we change our system, which, in point of fact, had not been changed very much since it was created some 25 years ago. We also made other changes, and again, this was at the recognition that the population we were detaining were simply more aggressive than had once been the case. Commissioner Reed provided some data to support that. You know, I looked at the numbers this morning. I think we have 23 or 24 juveniles in detention today who are charged with murder, which to me is shocking. We have probably another 30, 40, 50 who are charged with other Class A or Class B felonies. When I was a county attorney back 30 years ago or whenever it was, we just didn't see that. And as I talk with law enforcement officers across the state, I'm told uniformly that the population of juveniles today is just different. And I'm sure there's a lot of sociological reasons for that I probably wouldn't understand, but it's something that we have to deal with in a realistic way. So we've made a few changes that I think have been helpful. In December of 2022, we decided that we would deploy for the first time non-lethal defensive equipment to our staff. Now, what that means in sort of plain talk is pepper spray, tasers, shields. Now, the pepper spray, and this was also then embedded into Senate Bill 162, so it is now a legislative mandate. In terms of the way the OC spray is used, all of our corrections officers are trained in its use and they carry it with them. The tasers are kept locked in a vault of some sort. People are not walking around with tasers on their hips, but the tasers are there in the event that there is a substantial disturbance that requires a little different sort of equipment. And of course, the shields can be used again in the event of a more substantial disturbance. So the OC spray was distributed in the facilities beginning in February of 2023. At this point, all of our detention centers have been trained and certified. We want to thank the Department of Corrections for providing that training. The Department of Corrections has been a fabulous partner in all of this, as they have provided expertise to help us bring these matters along. We also relied on the Department of Corrections beginning in December of last year to train our detention staff and youth development staff concerning security threat groups, which unfortunately, now that is a very important thing in detention centers. It has long been important in adult correctional facilities, but we see now that these young people who are in detention often identify with certain groups. So you have young people who, in not all cases, but in many cases, are accused of committing very serious crimes, very serious acts of violence. And if they're a member of one of these groups, it's more likely to be an organized act of violence, which means it's more like those sort of activities are more likely to continue once they're in a detention facility. So by training our staff to be able to identify detainees who may be affiliated with these groups, that will help us to get in front of some of these problems and help us to understand that maybe this juvenile should not be housed with this juvenile. Maybe there are rival groups that you have to account for, and if you don't account for them, you're going to have a problem. So that we've now identified a security threat group coordinator in every facility, and the hope is that, again, this will help us to prevent some of the problems before they occur. There will always be limitations with that when you're operating. These facilities are very small, so the degrees of separation are maybe not ideal, but still having that knowledge on the front end will make for safer facilities. We also are working with the Department of Corrections, and again, this is a part of Senate Bill 162, to create emergency response teams for each of these detention centers that will be roughly based on the CERT teams operated by corrections. It won't look exactly the same, of course, in a juvenile justice center because they're smaller and you're dealing with juveniles. But still, we will have a cadre of people who work at each facility who will have some specialized training to respond in the event that there is really a substantial disturbance that is more than, say, one juvenile simply acting out. And again, in conjunction with the requirements of Senate Bill 162, our detention centers are developing memorandums of understanding with local law enforcement so that we are better coordinated with local law enforcement than we have been in the past. and we have a sort of a joint response plan with local law enforcement. We also determined in December of 2022 that we wanted to enhance the professionalism of our detention center staff. One way to do that, we thought, was to require uniforms. And that requirement was also codified by Senate Bill 162. We think, again, that is just one step forward in having a more professional approach to this. The uniforms now have been ordered. I think all of the facilities have received their first shipment. It's like anything you buy these days, there are glitches in the supply chain, but the uniforms are being deployed as we speak. We're also addressing training. And again, this is in statute and was also a part of our plan. There's going to be monthly training on security topics for our staff that we think will be very important. And Senate Bill 162 also requires a management training program to start to provide a foundation for the next generation of leadership in DJJ, and that program is in development. In addition to that, in addition to the requirements of Senate Bill 162, we are going to do really a complete overhaul of our training for corrections officers. We're going to come in and do a needs analysis and sort of rebuild it from the ground up. We may find that there won't be a lot that will need to be changed. We may find that we need to do quite a bit of revamping. But the idea is to kind of take it down to the foundation and go in and do a considered study of what our training needs to accomplish in these detention facilities. Because again, the times are different now than when this system was devised 20 years ago. At our request, and Governor Beshear proposed a reorganization of the department, and we were able to work with Senator Carroll to have that embedded in Senate Bill 162 that we think will be a move forward, particularly for the detention area. And we think we're already seeing the benefits of that. And essentially, the reorganization does a couple of things. It splits off detention into its own office so that the detention facilities are under its own line of management. In previous times, the detention facilities were managed by the same group as the youth development centers and the group homes and the day centers and all of the other facilities operated by DJJ. But the issue is, at least to me, the detention centers are just different. They're pre-adjudication. They're the first contact that we have with juveniles. And it's important to remember, I know all of you understand this, that, the department, they don't go out and recruit kids for detention. We have to take whoever the court orders into detention. And that oftentimes includes, as I've indicated, unfortunately, some juveniles who have committed some grave acts of violence, and some of whom are committed to continuing that sort of conduct. And we also, unfortunately, end up with a lot of kids that are suffering from serious mental illness. So the detention centers are a little bit different than the post-adjudication facilities, and this reorganization just recognizes that. We've also created an office of compliance, a compliance office, compliance division. I think we're already seeing the fruits of that. It builds upon what already existed in the department, which was the old quality assurance division, but we've enhanced the authorities and the powers of the compliance division. One of the things that the compliance division, and they've started doing this, and again, we've already seen the benefits of it. These folks are going out in the field to DJJ facilities, and they show up unannounced, and they walk into the facilities and they have the run of the place. They can talk to anybody there, juveniles, staff. They can look at any document. They can review whatever they want to do. They report directly to the commissioner. And I think that's going to be very helpful in us identifying problems and solving problems before the problems are manifested into something that is really impactful and significant. And I think it will also help us to start to build a core of best practices in these facilities that we can migrate from one facility to another. Frankly, I think one of the problems that we've had in the past is the facilities were sometimes operating too much as isolated outposts. And we need to have a consistent set of best practices that are adopted throughout the system. In terms of the Office of Detention, I think I've spoken with many of you before about Larry Chandler, who we hired as the Director of Security for the department back in January of this year. Mr. Chandler now is serving as the Deputy Director of the Office of Detention. James Sweat recently started as the Executive Director of that office. Mr. Sweat has experience as a warden of prisons, I think multiple Kentucky prisons, and he also has experience in the Department of Juvenile Justice. Mr. Chandler, I think it's fair to say, is really sort of a legendary figure in Kentucky corrections. Many of this generation of corrections leaders were trained by Mr. Chandler. And so what they bring to this is a wealth of experience in how to run safe and secure facilities. And again, we understand that juveniles are different, but I would just not back up 1 inch from the statement that we're not going to do anything good for these juveniles unless we start from a basis of safe and secure facilities. If you don't have that, you don't have a foundation for any other programming. So we think that this reorganization will move us forward in that regard. The next item that we are attacking is we are modernizing our IT and data operation at the department. Many of you have heard me acknowledge before that this was something that was badly needed. As we started trying to address some of the issues that have arisen, we've found it to be more difficult than it should be to get timely and accurate information. And as we've dug into that, we've realized that the DJJ data systems were just built for a different time. It could not capture much of the information we needed. We struggled mightily to capture historical information, which is important because you need to be able to identify trends. That's how you get in front of some of these problems. So what we did in January is we added DJJ to the contract that already existed for the Kentucky Offender Management System, COMS it's called, that the Department of Corrections uses. Now there's a module that the software provider has for juvenile operations. The COM systems, at least on the correction side, which is tracking probably 23,000 people, works very, very well. So this is going to be an ongoing process of implementing the system. To be fully implemented, it will take a year or so, but we're already developing the first component of it. And when we get to the end of this, the managers of the department will have access to much more data, to historical trends, to more detailed data about the juveniles that we're keeping, and more timely data. And I'm a believer in the old management saw that you can't manage what you can't measure. And if you don't have data, it just seems to me you're always behind the curve. So I think this will be really a significant enhancement. This also was a requirement of Senate Bill 162, I believe, that we endorse and embrace wholeheartedly. This will be a big step forward. And then we're also making improvements to our facilities. These juvenile detention facilities are, none of them are new. Most of them are 20, 25, 30 years old. Some of them, the facility in Jefferson County, for example, was not ever intended to be a detention facility. And the fact that it was, that is the case has caused us not insignificant problems because it just was not built to that, to the sort of specifications you need in a juvenile facility. So we have made significant improvements already at that facility. Those improvements continue. We've made significant improvements in Warren County and Breathitt County. We contracted early on with the ACA, the American Correctional Association, to inspect our facilities and to report on any shortcomings that their inspection might reveal. We also asked for Director of Security Larry Chandler to visit our facilities, and at this point I think he's visited every detention facility and every YDC, and it's given us detailed reports on what improvements he believes, based on decades of experience, should be made in our physical facilities. We worked, I think, very well with the legislative leaders and Senator Carroll, and we received appropriations to make these needed improvements. And these are kind of nuts and bolts items in many cases, just like having better locks on the doors, having in some cases better cameras or more cameras so that you don't have blind spots in the facilities, having doors that have slotted trays in them. That sounds like kind of a simple thing, but if you have a juvenile who is extremely aggressive, and sadly, we have some of those that will tell you and that have told us that when you open that door, I'm going to attack you. And they keep their promise, some of them. So if you have a slotted door, you can often avoid a confrontation because maybe you don't have to open the door. So nobody wants those situations, but in the real world, you have them. So we're making those kind of improvements that did not exist in these facilities that were built at a different time for a different population, and that will lead to safer, more secure facilities. The recent legislation also provides for a number of enhancements to assist juveniles that we keep that have mental health issues, and Commissioner Reed's going to discuss where we stand with those.
Yes, and before I do that, I would be remiss if I did not mention that when I was giving our numbers before, I left out our community staff, and I think they might come get me if I didn't mention that we also serve 712 kids that are on probation or what you would call parole status, and predisposition reports and other things that we do in the community. So I wanted to make sure I cover that. And when we talk about mental health, it's across our system. Our community kids that I just mentioned, we work on that with them, with our youth development centers, with our group homes, with our day treatments, and with detention centers as well. Senate Bill 162 requires us to enter into contracts to attempt to assure that we have the availability of institutional treatment for youth with severe mental illness. We're also required and want to provide youth in crisis in a DJJ facility access to the mental health professionals that they need. The other thing that the bill includes that we're excited about is $1.5 million for us to have a diversionary program to identify and provide treatment for any youth identified as suffering from severe mental illness. So something we're working on now. House Bill 3 requires automatic detention of youth accused of certain public offenses, including considered violent, for up to 48 hours, exclusive of weekend and holidays, pending their detention hearing. Those will need to be assessed by a professional during that time, and any treatment recommended will be provided by DJJ or a contract with another organization. The effective date of that provision is July 1st of 2024, so it's not one that we're doing right now. House Bill 3 also allows for youth in detention to have visitation from certain groups that you see here, which was fine and something we always encourage. We want our kids to have as many connections with the community as they can. There are certain challenges with mental health services. We have to do a lot of triaging when kids come in to what have immediate need. Is a kid completely high on drugs? Is this youth completely suicidal at the time that they come in? And we have to look at the fact that they may be coming in and out with very short time frames. So we've always provided mental health and education services. Because their cases are still in pre-adjudicative status, we've been somewhat limited in some of the things that we can offer. They may not be guilty of the offense or what they're detained is another limitation. Youth have the right, they're not been found guilty of anything, so they and or their parents and or their attorneys can say, we don't want you to participate in any. And we're doing a contract with one group right now to provide services, and that's one of the things we have to work on. They said they won't step in our building until they have parent permission on every single youth before they'll provide any services to them. The other big thing is we don't know. When a kid comes in at midnight, he may be gone at 7 in the morning and not ever come back. He may be there a couple of weeks, couple of days, few months, 2 years. So you get a whole bunch of different types of kids with different sorts of situations come in. And the other thing is not every kid who comes in the building needs detention services. We have some kids who come in who were stealing food because they didn't have anything to eat. And what they need is food in the house. And so we want to try to make sure that we meet all of their needs as well. We have released a request for proposal for institutional mental health treatment. That was released on May 15th. It closes on 6/12. I hope that somebody does respond to that. We will see. One of the issues is that these are private companies and individuals and healthcare providers, and so whether they want to contract with us will be an issue. We've faced historically very difficult, and I know some of you have been involved with this too, in getting our youth into mental health psychiatric placements because they're either too aggressive or have other issues. And oftentimes the placements that we might use have been dealing with some of the same issues we have as far as staffing, and the number of actual beds they have available is limited as well. A lot of times we really do come into the custodian of last resort. And I can tell you, and I inform Secretary Harvey of this all the time, of some of the cases that we get. I mean, we have had nonverbal autistic youth in our facility. We had one youth came in a wheelchair on a status offense, paralyzed. And the reason he was paralyzed is he had jumped off a bridge and broke his lower body. And so, he's in our facility. Just within the last few weeks, we had a child with Down syndrome in our facility. So we get a very wide type of youth. And I'll just mention, too, in addition to the mental, we get an extreme wide range of youth with physical issues. We had one kid leave our detention center to go straight to Nashville to get a liver transplant. We have kids with cancer, diabetes, numerous health issues that we are dealing with. I mentioned the $1.5 million, and we are working with, as it was mandated in the Senate Bill 162, with our friends, and we are one of the members of them, of the State Interagency Council of SEAC, as we call it, to establish this diversionary program. And they're excited about doing that, and we're hoping if we should see results of this pilot, we might come back and say we'd like some more money to expand these services beyond that. So we are always, seeking to improve our mental health services in detention, and we are trying to meet some of the challenges that we have with that. One of the things that we're looking at, we have a whole clinical staff, and we have an evidence-based treatment program committee. And we've been working for some time, and we've accelerated our ability to try to get this into our detention centers, where we're going to run an open-ended program that will cycle through. Because that's another problem with the treatment. Like, we do regression replacement training, if some of you all are familiar with that. It's a very well-known evidence-based program in our YDCs. Well, it's a closed group. The same 10 kids are in there for 8 to 10 weeks, and you can't let any new kids come and go. It's the same group. A lot of the treatment services are that way. So with detention coming in and out, So we've got one that we're getting ready to implement that we will have it consistent with the weeks across all of our center. Every center will be doing the same week at the same time, and we'll be able to have the kids cycle in and out. And this is not going to be an in-depth. This is not going to deal with the offense that they're there. We're not treating arsonists for arson or sex offenders for sex offense issues, but it will deal with trauma, thinking and coping skills, and some of the basic types of cognitive behavioral things. So we're excited about getting that done. So we're happy to report on some of those changes that we've done.
And I just to follow up, and for some of you, I know you will have heard me have said this a number of times, but I do want you to know that we take very seriously our obligation to implement the legislative changes that were made in this session. We have regular meetings to talk about that. We've broken the legislation down into all of its components, really two primary bills, and there's a lot of stuff there. We have a DJJ manager and somebody at the cabinet level who's responsible for every one of these components. We have milestones. We are tracking our implementation of what the legislature enacted. So I say that to say that we take that, our obligation there, very, very seriously. I am concerned about the requirement that we enter into a contract with private providers to provide sufficient institutional treatment for severely mentally ill juveniles, because I just don't know that those providers are out there. I hope, as the commissioner said, we'll get some responses to our RFP. But I'll tell you, experience teaches that even if we do get to that point, as a practical matter, if we have a juvenile who has a severe mental illness, and because of that mental illness, they are aggressive and violent, and they attack the staff of that hospital or that treatment facility, they're not going to take care of those kids. And again, I know for some of you this is repetitive, but the child that so much was written about in the newspapers over the last few months had a severe mental illness. Severely mentally ill children don't belong in a detention facility. They belong in a treatment facility. But I know for our judges, they may not have a better choice. They may not have any choice. And so this child that so much was written about, I know from personal examination of the records that the department folks over the course of a few months tried 9 different private placements in treatment facilities for this child. They would not take care of her because she was extremely aggressive and extremely violent. And this was a female juvenile. Now, we have males in the same situation that may be, one comes to mind that's 6'1", 255 pounds. So I say that to say that we're going to do our best to comply with this statutory mandate, but you can't do that without a partner. And I fear that there are no partners out there in the private sector that will take care of these kids. So I just want to bring that to your attention. Senate Bill 162 codifies many of the investments that the Beshear administration has made in DJJ since 2022. And I think the language in Senate Bill 162 goes a long way to enhance the security of our facilities. Senate Bill 162 also requires that we develop and implement a plan to create a new model of regional detention as soon as practicable, while safely segregating males and females and violent and nonviolent offenders. And I'll come back to that in just a minute. House Bill 3 provided appropriations to essentially renovate and reopen the downtown Louisville facility for Jefferson County juveniles. There's $13.4 million appropriated to design and construct the first phase of that downtown facility in Louisville. There's also additional money appropriated that is being spent as we speak to make improvements to the Linden facility. And I think we're in the process of obtaining a design team, doing the RFP work for a design team for the downtown facility. So that's a longer-term project that, of course, for the most part, will be handled by the finance cabinet until the contractors are in place and the work is completed. But we look forward to the day when that downtown facility will be reopened and will provide certainly needed additional capacity in Jefferson County, providing that we can staff it. And I just want to keep that in front of the group, that staffing is always a concern. And when that facility is ready to open, we're going to have to find a lot of Jefferson County folks to work there. The last thing that I want to address, and just to make you aware of the issues, are kind of the interplay between House Bill 3 and Senate Bill 162 on our capacity. And we're working through this process. This is going to require, I think, some considered analysis about what's possible and what's not. But under Senate Bill 162, we are to return juveniles for detention to their closest facility, to the regional facility. And we are also to separate boys and girls within that facility and separate violent offenders from nonviolent offenders. So essentially you have 4 categories of separation. Our facilities tend to be pretty small. Most of them are about 40 beds. And so this is, I'm not making a philosophical argument here at all, but I'm just making you aware of a potential arithmetic problem. Just for example, in Warren County today, I looked this morning, we have 39 males in Warren County detention today. I think the capacity at Warren's 40. Is that right? Most of our facilities are divided into pods of 10. And so just at Warren, if you just say, well, we're going to take one pod and have 5 beds for high offender girls and 5 for low offender girls, that leaves you with 30 beds for boys. We got 39 boys there today. So you can see the arithmetic problem. And we're just at the beginning of this analysis, so I just want to raise that this does create some complexities that we want to be transparent about. We're very grateful that Senate Bill 162 appropriated some money for us to hire some experts and some design people to help us understand how we can maybe reconfigure our facilities to meet the requirements. But I just, again, want to be very upfront and transparent that there are some challenges here. And those challenges probably will be certainly will be exacerbated with the full implementation of House Bill 3. House Bill 3 requires that all juveniles charged with a violent crime be detained at least until their detention hearing. Based on data we get from the Administrative Office of the Courts, which is the only source of this data, for the year 2022, that would have resulted in the detention for some period of time of over 400 juveniles who were not detained under existing law in 2022. So I say that to say when you put that requirement with the Senate Bill 162 requirement together, I'm concerned that there's going to be some extreme pressures on our capacity. Just, again, an arithmetic problem about how whether or not we have enough beds, because it's not enough to say, well, maybe you have 250 beds in the system and only 230 kids in the system. You actually have 8 different problems because you have 8 different detention facilities. So we're going to be working through that. We're going to be trying to do what I hope will be a solid analysis so we can all see where we stand with that. But I do want to make you aware that that's an issue that's front of mind for us. And that concludes our presentation. I think we've made a lot of improvements in the last year or so. I think we have benefited greatly from the work of the legislature in providing a lot of money that was needed, and legislation that provides a lot of improvements. We're not where we want to be. This is a continuing process, and it's a slow process, but I do believe that our facilities are much improved today from what they were a year ago.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Very thorough presentation, and I know that it's a vast undertaking what you've gone through, almost, I guess, an hour of presentation there, so we appreciate the time. Representative Bratcher, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have like 5 questions. I'll be quick just to get clarification
Sure.
on. The regional, what you just addressed, are you saying that you're not going to do that, or where are you at on that?
No, sir. We're certainly not saying we're not going to do that. We understand what's in the statute. What we have to do is figure out how we can do that, because again, it is not.
Well, it went like 25 years that way until.
No, sir.
2
That's
years
not
ago.
quite correct. That the system that is embedded in Senate Bill 162 is not something we've ever had before. Prior to Senate Bill 162, you had girls and boys often in the same pods. You had high-level offenders and low-level offenders next door to one another. Senate Bill 162 does require that they be returned to the regional centers, but it requires that these 4 groups be kept separated from one another. That's a different thing than has ever been done before.
Okay, I see that.
And it will inherently, again, I'm not saying this is good or bad,
I get it now.
but it will create a more inefficient use of the beds, because how do you ever know how many beds you need for girls? So you're always going to have probably a few empty beds for high-level girls, a few empty beds for high-level boys. Under the old system, you could use every bed all the time. So this is different than what's been done in the past.
On House Bill 3 and the 48-hour, I'm so sick of talking about that. Violent people belong incarcerated, if that's the right word for juveniles, but until somebody with authority, like a judge, decides what to do. That's my opinion. I've had all the political talks. I want to talk about it. So my request to you is that we're coming up on a budget year. We delayed this deadline till July 1, 2024. So please come to the next session, and tell us how you're going to do that. And if you need more resources, then, let us hear about it. Don't let us guess about it.
And Representative Bratcher, that's exactly why I made the comments today. I want to be upfront about this. And again, I'm not here to argue at all about the merits or the arguments, the policy arguments about House Bill 3. I'm talking about the practical issues of just having the capacity in the system, and that's what we're gonna do as detailed a look at as we can. And if we need additional resources to do what the legislature wants to do, we'll tell you what that is as best we can do.
Thank you.
And I wanted to.
I didn't mean to get off on
Okay.
a rough edge here. It's just that
Okay.
those last paragraphs you talked about got me going here. So here's some more questions, and I won't take all the time. Do we still have troopers at the facilities?
We have troopers just in the last couple of weeks. We've pulled the troopers from Fayette and Warren, and they will shortly be pulled from Adair. That was always part of the plan as these facilities got up to the normal staffing complement.
Best practices, you mentioned that. It seems to me with 50 states out there, and maybe even Europe, that's dealing with juvenile issues, obviously, that there would be a best practice data bank somewhere. Is there just not? Do we not have other states and in the legislature, we have the NCSL, state legislatures. We come together every now and then and talk about what's this state doing that, we got 50 experiments. I think Carter or Reagan said that at one time. Got 50 experiments going on. Surely there's best practices out there without us having to go through each movement and find best practices on our own.
Yes, there are best practices out there, and we look at those extensively. I'm a member of the Correctional Juvenile Justice Administrators, and so I meet regularly with counterparts across the nation. There's a coalition of juvenile justice, the Children's Law Center, who came in and did a study. Annie Casey, which is one of the well-known ones, has a whole list of standards and so forth. So yes, those are out there, and we have tried to follow those for many years and continue to look at implementing best practices.
I mean, each state has a juvenile justice department, I'm sure.
Well, actually, most of them do. There are a couple that are completely county operated. And like Michigan, I believe, is one. They don't have a central body. Every county does their own thing. But for the most part, most of them have a central agency.
But from what we've seen, and we have tried in, I think, a fairly comprehensive way to look at what's going on in other states. And there are a lot of other states that are having much bigger problems than we've had. And you can look at Texas, you can look at Louisiana, Ohio. It's done a lot of the same kind of things that we've done in the last few months. So the problems that we've seen in Kentucky are not isolated. In fact, in a lot of states, they've been far worse.
You mentioned that you might not have any contractors that want to work with you. Were you just talking about like that during our that task force we had, there was discussions that Our Lady of Peace took some, severe cases. Is that what you were referring to? Like,
yes, sir. Yes, sir. And we're not talking about. I want to be clear. We're not talking about a huge number of kids, but you would be shocked to know how one juvenile like that. I mean, we've had multiple staff people that have just left because you cannot possibly do what you need to do for a severely mentally ill kid in a juvenile detention facility. Yeah. And it's not, it's not fair to the child. It's not fair to our staff. But for those severely mentally ill juveniles that are super aggressive and super violent, our experience has been that the private treatment facilities just won't take them. Is that correct? Well,
at one time there was the Our Lady of Peace. Now it's called Peace Hospital. Mm-hmm. And I guess that contract was lost. That agreement was lost.
We've had discussions with Peace, and Senator Carroll's aware of this recently, and they're just and I'm not casting any kind of aspersions on the private facilities. I mean, they're just not going to subject their staff to that kind of danger.
And the last one, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your patience. You said that the JC facility was not designed to be a detention facility. Did you say that?
The facility in Linden, not the downtown facility, the Linden facility.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right,
what was the prior use of that facility, Commissioner?
It was a youth development center for post-disposition use.
But now it's being used as a detention center. But when the one in Louisville gets online, this one will go back to a youth development center? Is that?
I think we'll take a look at the best use of it. It may be that we would need those beds for lower level juveniles
to deal with the
right.
issue that.
I think part of that is numbers knowing. When I first came on, we were running 16 to 23 Jefferson kids in detention, and now we're up to 50s and 60s and sometimes 70s. So, the capacity issue has come on strong.
Well, thank you guys for a great presentation. I was sorry I was late. There was traffic in Louisville, but it's a great presentation. And I didn't mean to come on so strong there. My caucus says I'm the nicest a-hole they've ever met. So I don't mean to be that way. It's just I'm so tired of these discussions. But that's what we're here for, is to keep working through these things. So thank you guys very much for being here in your presentation.
Thank you, Representative Bratcher. I am going to turn the meeting over to Senator Carroll because I have to step out for a prior commitment, and I will recognize Representative Herron before I turn it over to Senator Carroll.
Thank you. And thank you all for your presentation. It's a lot of information, and I know that with the changes that we did this past session, it's a lot. And so I thank you all for your dedication. The question that I actually have two questions. Is there any way that we can get an outline of the phases for the data, what that is going to look like in the different phases? If we could get a copy of that or just get more information.
I'm not sure I understand exactly what you're asking.
So you all said as far as rolling out the changes with the system, the data system?
The comm system?
Yep.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Oh,
If
sure,
we can
yeah.
get just an update of what those phases are going to look like,
I think
we can be on board of.
I think we can do that.
And then the other question I have is regarding the detention center that is going to be downtown in Jefferson. I know that you all talked about it a little bit, but what is the update, the timeline? Do we know any more details about how much it's going to cost? When are we thinking that this facility is going to be open? Just a little bit more details about where we are with that facility.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of detail on that, Representative. I think we're at the point now where they're trying to engage design professionals. And as this process works, at least as I understand it, through the procurement of design and construction services and all that, the bulk of that will be carried by the finance cabinet for that part of it. But I know they're moving as quickly as they can to get a design team in, and then it'll move on to the construction phase. But every time I've ever guessed about the end date of a construction project, I've been wrong.
Who should we contact to get more information about that? And the reason why I ask, still with that facility, one of my concerns or questions is that the best location? How much is it going to cost when we look at the overall needs for Jefferson County? I'm still concerned about, is that building the best location? How much is it going to cost now, and what are some of the foreseeing cost in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, let me see what I can get for you on that. Again, some of that information probably resides in a different agency, and I suspect some of it, in terms of final costs and that sort of thing, probably a little bit premature until you get a design completed and see what's possible with that facility. But let me see what we can come up with to update you on that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Representative. Secretary Harvey and Representative Bratcher, to kind of further answer your question with Our Lady of Peace, when we left the session, we were in discussions with representatives from U of L, Our Lady of Peace, and the facility that they, and Secretary, correct me if I'm wrong, the facilities that they previously used were being remodeled to serve kids with autism, if I remember correctly.
I believe that's right.
And they were in the process of trying to look at other assets that U of L had available to possibly convert for our purposes. And in those meetings, Secretary Friedlander was a part of that. So it's not, this is going over beyond the population in detention, but also the population that falls under Secretary Friedlander's cabinet with those kids. Same group of kids, just at different locations with the struggles that they have. So that is an ongoing issue. Have you all heard anything more? Any other recent contacts from U of L or Our Lady of Peace?
I have not, Senator, okay. but in fairness, those contacts would have probably gone to CHFS. So I don't think I would be the first point of contact there.
Okay. And so that's going to be an ongoing issue that we're going to have to deal with. And if we're unable to reach any agreements with private providers, I think as a state, we're going to have to look at the option of the state setting up a system for these kids. You know, regardless of what they may or may not have done, we can't keep going the way we are. It's inhumane, some of the things that have been going on, and as a state, we have to do better than that. So I think that's going to be one of the options that we're going to have to look at some point. And not that we haven't had those discussions, but where that would be, how that might be structured is a whole conversation within itself that we're going to have to look at. And it may be building a program from the ground up for these kids. The other question I had, and Commissioner, this may be more for you. We talked a little bit about where we are right now. And you said troopers have been pulled out of some of the facilities. What are you all seeing in Adair? I'm not aware of any further incidents since we left session. The last two, I think, were in Warren County with the issues. Have we had other incidents? Have we had any other injuries with staff or injuries with kids being detained? Where are we right now?
I think we've seen a substantial improvement. We've not had any major incidents. I think we've still had a couple incidents where staff have been assaulted, just individual staff with an individual youth. And some of that, can happen in the blink of an eye. I watch some of the, everything's on tape and some of the video, and one of them we saw is, a youth just standing there who all of a sudden just hauls off and slams his fist in someone's face. So, some of those things you are impossible. But as far as the overall, I think we're much better. Adair is one of the ones we have seen the most substantial increase in staff. And what I was told locally was that for that amount of money in that region, a lot of those people were driving many miles away to work. And now with the ability to get that starting pay, we were able to see substantial numbers. I think we had 12 in one academy and 14. And so we're much better off with our numbers. But again, as Secretary Harvey mentioned, they're also brand new. And it takes a while to get good at this and to know all the things that you have to do. So we're still working on getting them where we want to be, but I think we've made substantial progress.
And I would just say we've had a system now for several months where if there is a significant incident, like if a staff person is assaulted and injured in a significant way, or a juvenile, 24/7, I get a call, Commissioner Reed gets a call, and so and that's been while not all those calls come at convenient times. It's been, we talk to our people in real time when these things happen, and I think that the situation is greatly improved. What I hear from our people is that, you're never, as the commissioner said, you have some of these juveniles that just are out of the blue, they're going to slug somebody, and there's no way to prevent that. But our people tell us that they feel much more capable of responding effectively to those incidents than might have been the case some time ago.
Are there any DOC guards that are working in detention facilities today?
There may be at Campbell a couple of P&P people who are still there that came in before and have still working some evening shifts. So I think we're down to just maybe 2.
Okay.
But just to elucidate on that a little bit, because I want you to get the full picture, we still have a very stressful situation with staffing Campbell County. And so this goes back, a couple of months. We asked for volunteers from DOC, and a lot of them are like probation and parole officers, trained people to help us in Campbell County. And DOC's provided a lot of help, and that should be acknowledged. These folks have really allowed us to keep that place going. But we're seeing a little more interest in those jobs, and we think we'll see slow improvement in the staffing.
And as we talk through all the issues with the detention facilities, and you and I had this conversation. I toured the Youth Development Center in Mayfield, and while I was there was a kid coming the next day that was charged with murder, and that was a facility. They have a security fence. It doesn't have a gate. They have doors. The doors don't have locks. So as the next level of this, and again, under the same premise that we're dealing with a different group of kids than we were 20 years ago. And so that carries on to the next levels. What are we doing within the youth development centers? And I know when I was there was a kid that I think had been charged with rape that escaped twice within maybe a month period. I may not be exact on that. The second time, I think KSP called him and he ended up being moved. But, and I know I've heard comments from residents and concerns about things like that. So what are we doing at that next level beyond detention to make sure these facilities are secured?
Well, we have had, as you mentioned, Mr. Chandler, doing an assessment and looking at that. I will say, let me explain a little bit on that. We wouldn't put a youth charged with murder as a straight placement into a place like Mayfield. I think the youth you're talking about, just to further explain, had already been in one of our other facilities for 2 years. So we have some youth that might have been charged with murder that were, not able to be tried as an adult, and they're with us, and they're going to be released at 18. And at some point, we have to start stepping those youth down, and even back to the community where we can supervise them. But we would not. A youth charged with murder is going to go to like a dare. So that step down kid. It's amazing for the facilities that we have to be basically staff secure, other than a dare. We only had in 2022 one youth AWOL, and that was from Mayfield, the entire year from YDC, which is really pretty much unheard of. And it's one of the things that amazes other states. I think it's a credit to the culture that some of our facilities have built up. And honestly, for some of them especially, it's because they're located in very geographically remote, surrounded by water on 3 sides. Mayfield is probably our one that's most flat land right closer to town. So we do look at all the kids and but I'm going to be honest, we're going to need at some point in the future a new YDC that does not have the dormitory set up that we have at all of these. We need a YDC with individual rooms, because those facilities, some of them go back to the 1960s and 70s when we had little 5'2" kids in there and so forth. And we were able to have 40 and 50 kids in those facilities. Now there's no way we would put that many, where there's not an ability to separate them out. They're bigger, they're more aggressive. But somewhere down the pike, we're going to have to be spending some money on a new facility that's going to house some of those medium range kids that maybe don't need a dare but don't need Mayfield either.
But we did have, as the commissioner indicated, and I think I mentioned earlier, Mr. Chandler, once he made his tour of the detention facilities, he's now toured all of the YDCs. He's made a lot of detailed recommendations. The department is considering those. And the department will be taking a look at what improvements they think need to be made, and whether or not we have existing resources to fund that, or whether we'll need to come back next year to do that. I take the point. These YDCs, for the most part, are very old facilities, and there's a lot of improvement that needs to be made in the physical plan. I think you would probably agree with that. So.
And I would give the folks in Mayfield a compliment. I was impressed with what I saw there with their carpentry type programs, mechanical programs, and the staff. You could tell they loved what they did, and they were committed to their kids, and they just wanted things to get better. So I enjoyed my time with them. I think I'm going to Tyra Thomas Walker, I think, is on Zoom. You are recognized for a comment.
Sorry, you all. I have a comment and a question now. I'm sorry, if that's okay.
You are fine. Go ahead.
Thank you. Been an educator with JCPS, and also working. My second job is at U of L Peace Hospital. The one thing that I want to address, it was Representative Bratcher made a statement about violent criminals, whether children should be incarcerated. So the statement I have for that is children are not born violent, and those that are dealing with mental health issues don't belong behind bars, are incarcerated. We need to find a resolution for children with mental health and resolution for children that are committing these violent crimes. So I want us to find a way, put some resources, whatever we can do to help with crime reduction. We need systems in place that can provide the data to prove that their methods that they're using is effective. Because it is sad that right now I'm listening to us talk about building more facilities for children when we need to figure out what has really happened to those children to make them want to resort to a life of crime. Resort, to a life of crime. Thank you.
Okay. Christina Weeder, you are recognized.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, actually. One, oh, is it on? Is it on? Okay. Didn't have it close enough. Thank you. I was curious for some additional information about your data system. I will say in education, Kentucky having a unified data system for all of its schools is the envy of many other states. So that's something that we can be really proud of as a state in Kentucky. And I'm curious about if there are things that you hope that this data system will collect that is not currently being collected in your existing data system. And part of my question, I'll lead you to it in a second, but because I know that Commissioner Reed mentioned Wednesday at SEAC, that you were looking into positive behavior interventions and supports, which is, or PBIS, which is something that we've definitely seen as a positive thing in schools and definitely requires a lot of good data on the behaviors so that you can match the interventions with that. So could you say a little bit more about the data system that you're hoping to develop?
Well, the kinds of things that I would like to see, I mean, first of all, just basic nuts and bolts. When you have questions about how many kids do we have here, what are they charged with, where do they come from, you ought to be able to get that almost in real time, and that has not been the case. But beyond that, as a management tool, I know when we started looking at all of this, one of the things we wanted to be able to do is to go back and make some detailed comparisons about historical detention populations and what we're seeing today, and to try to identify trends and differences. And the system just did not provide useful data in that regard. And I think that for people who are managing these facilities and these populations in the future, they'll benefit greatly if we have very detailed information about not just numbers of kids and what they're charged with, but their demographics and where they're coming from, and maybe different outcomes from one jurisdiction to another. So we can, and I think that's how you begin to spot trends, and you can begin to spot problems while there's still manageable problems. And we just currently don't have access to anything like that. At least that's my opinion. You may have a different view of that. So.
No, I agree. And the other one I'll put on there too is just even like length of stay, which is a very important thing. And I think one of the things with our prior system, because it was regional, it was the idea that youth went to that facility and stayed, and the system hadn't been set up to track them across multiple moves. And so we were not getting those unduplicated numbers. So that was just one little problem that we're looking at, moving from a more antiquated system into a much better, more useful system.
Okay. Well, and I would hazard to say that if you are ever interested in seeing what we have available in the Department of Education system, that might be something to think about for what you put in your RFP for data system. We'd be happy to talk to you. One of the things that we've been excited about is that ability to track students over different placements, and what we call transient students, and that would include students who are involved with DJJ or DCBS or homeless, or just for whatever reason they end up having multiple enrollments across the state. And that's been very useful information, I think, for us to gather as a state, but also just to share with districts about how to better support them. And so the other question I had was really about just thoughts that you have on the kind of training that you want to be able to provide for the staff? I mean, obviously there are going to be some things that you're going to be doing around the physical security and everything, but I'm curious if trauma-informed practices, and obviously you mentioned PBIS previously, what other kinds of trainings are you thinking about for your plan?
Well, personally, I don't know that I have a preconceived notion about that. What I think we should do, again, is tear it down to the foundation and escape from the orbit, which is often very strong, of this is how we've always done it. Because that, to me, is the single worst justification for what we're doing today, is this is how we've, no matter what organization you're in. So what I want us to do is to bring in people who know this stuff, and we're doing that. We plan to partner with EKU, actually, who does this sort of needs assessment for a lot of different agencies, and just take this down to the foundation and build it up for what we need today. And I don't know what we'll find. You know, we may find that there aren't huge changes that are necessary, or we may find that we need to do a complete overhaul. But I think we need to be open to whatever the right result is. So I don't have a preconceived vision about this is how we need to do it. I think it's not sufficient to just continue to do what we've always done, because that's how we've always done it.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, we talked several times about the culture within DJJ and where it was, and an obvious need to change that culture. Since we left session, since the legislation's approved, changes were made by the executive branch, how have you all, as a system as a whole, sent the message that things are changing, the past, the conduct of the past, the expectations of the past no longer stand? It's a different day. We're going to be a different DJJ. We're going to set the standard for the rest of this country to follow. We're going to treat staff, we're going to treat kids that are being detained with respect, humanely. We're going to train you as staff. We're going to value you as staff. How have you all sent that message out that it's a new day?
And I think we've done that in several ways, and Commissioner Reed will probably have a better answer than I would. But I know we have talked more than once from our leadership on down about establishing a culture of excellence, about how we're going to do things the right way every time, that's going to be a habit. And I think we've been pretty open. And I mean, the way I see it, the financial commitment we've made to our people, I think, speaks volumes. But I think we also say to them, we're going to pay you more, but we're going to expect more. And the impression I get, and I will say, Senator, I've had more contact on the detention side than the post-adjudication side, but I believe that our staff is very appreciative of these changes. Now, I'm sure opinion is not uniform. You know, there's a lot of people there, but I think that our staff feels more empowered and better supported and better equipped than would have been the case some time ago. And I think that alone brings great improvement. What would you add to that, Commissioner?
Well, I think one of the things we've really strived for is a lot more consistency through the years. And I think partly this goes back to a number of different commissioners and changes and so forth. One of the things that we've wanted is to have everybody being more consistent across the board. And I mentioned being supportive of our staff and just being there, having an open door. I have been in every one of our facilities multiple times. Some of them have never had a commissioner, and I've been there 4 and 5 times in each building. I've tried to go to all the community offices. I sat down with all of our nursing staff, all of our detention alternative coordinators, with every transportation, maintenance folks, and some of the people that are most crucial to our system. When I go out to visit a facility, I make sure and go talk to the cooks and the maintenance people. They are some of the most crucial people that never get mentioned, our nurses and so forth. So just trying to be there and make sure that they understand that we are there to support them, and we do have high expectations. I feel like I'm getting a lot of positive vibes from everybody across the board, and I think they're excited that they're getting some of the recognition that they feel like that they need and deserve. Unfortunately, one of the things with juvenile justice is it's always the bad things that make the front page. And our staff, I'm glad you mentioned Mayfield. We have staff that go far and beyond, who spend their own money on things, who go above and beyond to do things for kids every day, and they don't get much recognition for all the really positive, wonderful things that they do out there. So I try to make sure that I let them know that I really appreciate those extra things that they do for us.
I would also say we've spent a lot of time and effort on things like making sure that our accountability processes are more consistent, the disciplinary process, that sort of thing, which frankly in the past I think has not been as consistent as it should be. And I know our HR staff working with our managers, and we've paid a lot of attention to that. So I think the message we're trying to send to our staff is that we need you, we love you, we've gone to bat for you, or the legislature's gone to bat for you. We're paying you more. You're going to have more help, but we are going to expect that we're going to have a culture of excellence in this department, and that there's going to be accountability when we don't live up to the expectations. And I think what we saw before, at least this is my impression, in particularly in a lot of these detention facilities, you just sort of get into this death spiral, where again, you're trying to staff these places with people you're paying $30,000 a year to start. So you can't possibly do that. So we had a situation where people were working a lot more than they should have been working, and they didn't have enough help. We had a lot of times in some of these facilities like Adair where there'd be maybe only 3-4 staff people in a facility at a time. Well, that's not right. But until we were able to offer a competitive compensation package, there's no way to pull the nose up, And I think now we've done that with the help of the legislature and with the governor's leadership. And so I think we are on an upward trajectory. But I have to say, it's not, it's never going to happen as fast as we want it to. A lot of this stuff takes time. It will take time to get all the staff hired. It will take time to get a more experienced staff. And there are always, we're not ever going to have a time where we don't have problems in juvenile detention facilities, because we're keeping some very troubled people who don't want to be there. And so it's not, we're never going to get to a time when there's zero incidents. I mean, what should be measured is, are we doing everything we can to minimize the number of incidents? Are we responding appropriately when they do occur? And are we providing the support, the education, the mental health services that those kids in detention need? So I think we're the direction is positive, but it's a journey, and we've not yet reached the destination.
Let me just mention one other thing. I just want to say, we want to make sure that we're not just in the silo of juvenile justice too. And I want to say how much I appreciate all of our other partners here. Commissioner Dennis and I had a meeting along with some of our staff that we're doing regularly to talk about dually committed kids that are committed to both of ours, and trying to solve some of those. The education folks that come in from the local school systems, Kentucky Educational Collaborative for State Agency Children, KECSAC. I'm always proud I can say that out real quick. With our teaching programs that are in there, DPA, who comes in and does post-dispositional and talks to every kid afterwards and comes to our YDCs regularly and meets with kids. We may not always agree, but I appreciate the fact that they're there on behalf of our kids. So there's a lot of other players that come to the table that are involved with us, and I really want to thank them for all of their support and expertise, and thank you for your offer of the education system. We'll be happy to look at that too, but we don't want to just stand alone.
Commissioner, I don't think it's any secret that there were a lot of calls to replace you, and in all honesty, I'm on that list, and it's nothing personal. Again, I've been through things like this enough in my law enforcement career to know that sometimes when you need a change of culture, you have to bring in new top leadership, and so it's good to hear that you're doing the things that you're doing, and I would ask that you be sensitive to that, because you may not get all the word back that we get from within your ranks, and I hope you will be sensitive to that and try to earn the trust and respect of your people, because without that, your success, Secretary, your success is going to be limited. And so I wanted to get that just kind of out in the open, because that was something we had a lot of discussion with, and not just you, but the one particular deputy commissioner, that there were a lot of calls for that individual to be replaced also. But please make those efforts, and please continue those contacts and listen to your people. I think we have made a lot of good steps, and I think we're developing a relationship where, as a legislature, and I'm talking House, Senate, Republicans, and Democrats, I've never seen a group come together to be more united on a topic than our working group was through all of that, and the relationship that we developed in working through these issues with the bills that passed. We need to build on that, and there needs to be a trust there, and the politics has got to be removed from all of this. So my hope is we'll continue down that path with open and honest dialogue, and not trying to one-up each other or trying to get out in front of the other for political purposes. This is too important to play those games. Representative Bratcher, you have a follow-up final statement, sir?
Yeah, just a couple of questions, but I do want to echo what the senator's saying. We're pulling for you. We want this to work, and it's very important. And I know you guys have endured quite a bit of. I'll get the right word. We've had an interesting 6 months, right? The last 6 months. So we're pulling for you. Here's my questions. There's investigations going on in some of the disruptions at the facilities like Adair and Warren. Is that ongoing? Will the public be able to see the investigations when they're done?
Well, there are certainly, in Adair in particular, there are law enforcement investigations going on, and, there was, I suspect there'll be charges and that sort of thing. And I suppose I guess with some of it, you would have to say it depends, to the extent that there were juveniles involved in that are treated as youthful offenders. They'll go to adult court, but of course, to the extent that they're charged and the charges are adjudicated in juvenile court, that will remain confidential.
Just to get something straight real quick, a juvenile comes to a detention center, and they stay in that detention center until there's a spot open in youth development center. Is that usually the case?
The vast majority of our kids who come to detention are not committed to DJJ later. I mean, there's a significant number, but a lot of kids come in, they're just waiting for their court case to be resolved.
Okay.
And they may be placed on probation. They may do a work project. They may, there's lots of things that the judges can do with those. For the kids that are committed to us, then when they usually are in detention, we have 35 days after they're committed to us for the public offenders to place them in a facility, and 60 days for kids who are tried as adults to place them.
The reason I ask that is, like, the youth development centers, that's where they get a bulk of their education and treatment, etc. But there is some going on in the detention centers also.
Well, the kids in detention center are going to get a school day. I mean, they need a 6-hour school day just like the other kids. Our Fayette detention had graduation ceremonies this week, and 3 of our kids graduated, and they had smiles as this big. We had a whole reception for them. Our graduation is next Friday for all the youth from our youth development centers. But they do get education. We do, as I said, some of the counseling and so forth that we can do. We're limited. Vocational programs are so strong in our YDCs. You mentioned our building and construction. I mean, we have welding, we have IT, we have kids who really come out with lots of certificates who get hired right away into some jobs. With detention, because of the equipment, you're much more limited. We can't give them welding and circular saws and all that. But one of the things we have looking to do to expand our vocational opportunities is we're doing the virtual. And so if you go into one of our centers now and you see a kid with that and he's rolling around on the floor, he's changing the oil in the car. And we also have a welding one where they can do that. So we're looking always to expand the services that we can as much as possible. Like I said, some of this is limited. To get a certificate usually takes a period of time. And for some of our kids, they're just in and out so quick that that's not possible.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator. You were doing such a good job. I was just going to let you finish.
I didn't
finish
realize
out.
you had walked back in the room. I'm sorry.
The joys of private law practice, as I find out every day, I guess, when you have to have 2 things at once. What is our next item here? Is there any more discussion so far? And I apologize for having said that. Yes, Sheriff, go right ahead. Sheriff, would you turn your mic on and proceed? Thank you.
Okay, I thought it was on. Sorry about that. Thank you all for your presentation. And I know you talked about the increase in violence among juveniles. And I know in my 39 years in this line of work, I've seen a tremendous increase over the years. We have 1 murder in Hardin County in 2022, and it was committed by a 17-year-old. We've had 2 so far this year, and the first one was by a 17-year-old. And so violence has increased. But I do know, on being on the board of the National Sheriff's Association, it's turned off. Excuse me. Being on the board of the National Sheriff's Association, I talk to sheriffs across the United States, and listening to how their juvenile justice system is, and some that are familiar with Kentucky's Juvenile Justice Center, we're looked at as somewhat of a model juvenile justice system compared to other states that I speak to. But thank you all.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you. And I just have to mention, we just had Louisiana folks come up, and they were amazed. We've had a lot of states come, and we are considered a model.
I did have one question that I thought of while I was running around the building. You talked about the defensive, I don't want to call it tactics, but defensive weapons that you are now employing. Did you look at any other state before you decided to? I think we talked about tasers, spray, and shields, and how other states have handled their juvenile facilities with, I guess, these defensive weapons for staff.
I think historically most states have not deployed that sort of equipment. I think last fall Ohio went to a similar system. I don't know about other states, but I mean, to me, and again, that's something we can disagree about. But the situation we had before we deployed OC spray is our frontline people had no means to defend themselves. So if there was some sort of attack or fracas, the only thing they had at their disposal was the use of physical force. So it's not a question of, are you going to use OC spray or nothing? Are you going to use OC spray, or are you going to have a wrestling match?
Right. No, I appreciate the answer. Is there Senator Carroll?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it. And just for my closing comments, I guess, and it's really to address this council. When we were working through the legislation, we had discussions about creating a separate task force within the legislature to look further at DJJ issues, and we decided to leave the responsibility to this council for a reason, and it's because of the expertise that's here. And we didn't want to just be very narrow-minded about the approach to resolving all these problems. We wanted it to be a across-the-board approach in looking at, well, we always say looking at the whole child with all the needs. And in a way, I guess that's why we made this decision, because you all look at it in a different way. And we have to consider all of those facets of this issue in developing policy that's going to move us forward in the future and provide us with the best DJJ system, the best outcomes. And in the end, that's what it's all about, whether it's a kid that comes into the system and leaves the system very quickly, or if it's some kid that's in there until they go to prison. We still need to make sure that we're doing our very best to have the best outcomes for that individual while we're protecting our staff and treating them as very much appreciated employees of this Commonwealth. So I would encourage each of you who are on this council. It has been elevated to a different level, and I don't mean any disrespect for those of you who are here in place of someone else. I don't mean that at all, but please make every effort if you are named to this council. Your expertise is needed as we move forward. This is not just a formality. The legislature has tasked this body with monitoring DJJ and ensuring that as we move forward that we're doing it properly. We probably didn't make all the right decisions during the legislative session, and the legislation's not perfect. We've already found a couple issues that we may have to fix. So understand that. We don't think it was a perfect product. We worked our tails off for 2 months. We were under a time crunch. We had a massive undertaking, and this legislature, again, all of us, we came together with the executive branch and we made it happen. Now it's on you, it's on us as a group to ensure that we move forward and we get this done. And in the end, all the right decisions are made and all the right policy is put into place. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Webb, you're recognized.
Thank you, and thank you all. It's a good progress report. Y'all have done a lot in a short time frame, much like our work group did. I think we do have a rational approach for the safety in utilization of what we talked about with the proper training. I think it's important. And as to Representative Bratcher talked about national focus, I've served on the NCSL Law and Justice Committee for 25 years. And I think certainly we do discuss juvenile issues with all the other states. And the trends of policy throughout the nation have pretty much followed what we've done and been data-driven trends. Now, things change. We've had a lot of socioeconomic issues. We've had gangs, foreign influences using our juveniles in ways that we didn't maybe have 20 or 30 years ago with cartels and whatnot. And, the family structure. All of these things have impacted this new demographic that everybody's having to deal with. I think that is a commonality throughout the nation. And I think we will see the pendulum swing back, much like we're looking at doing here, to some rational protection of juveniles, protection of staff, and rehabilitation and provide mental health services. The mental health component is what worries me the most about this presentation today. Having been in an area where we couldn't get providers to take state employees, and you can't make the private sector do that. Our resources are very limited in East Kentucky now, and certainly that's my biggest concern. I think we've gone down the right path so far on this issue, but I think that's an issue that concerns me as a practitioner. and a citizen and a policymaker more than anything that I've heard today. And I think we need to really concentrate on that, and maybe even in the event that we don't, we want to know what the plan B is, and should we look at the fiscal cost benefit analysis of having a staff in-house in the agency to maybe at least troubleshoot or be there for crisis management or for that small population of juveniles that need it. So those are my concerns, and I appreciate your presentation today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Do we have any other discussion or anyone else that would seek recognition? Yes, Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you all very much for your presentation, and I was glad to hear discussion and the dialogue on the mental health issues that juveniles and adults both are facing in the correctional setting. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the mental health commission as far as the work that they're doing on addressing mental health issues within the justice system. You've got a wide range of audience that's part of that group. I'm very interested in the dialogue that they're having, and I'm glad there's a focus on that. And then I think the recommendations that's going to come out of that work group is going to be very good, and I'm looking forward to seeing what improvements we can have from that group to address some of these mental health issues. That's obviously a big issue now with this population. And then also kind of piggybacking on that, Mental Health Summit is next week, the May 31st through June 2nd at the Galt House in Lexington or Louisville. So that's going to be a very good program. Lots of good items on the agenda. A lot of those focusing on the juvenile justice population, and then there's also juvenile justice focused work groups within that mental health commission. So I'm very grateful that work group's been formed, and that the work that's going to come from that. And then also, second thing, kind of piggybacking on what Representative Bratcher and Senator Carroll said as far as best serving the youth. Off of what Representative Bratcher said about the detention programming, has there been any discussion or thoughts on long-term detainees, those that obviously based on the offenses that they have or the complexity of their cases, we know they're going to be in detention for a long period of time, as far as giving them a specialized program that would be very similar to a YDC, so they aren't essentially warehoused and languishing within the detention setting?
Actually, it's interesting you bring that up because we had a complete plan to do that. We had a committee, we had it drafted, we were within weeks of getting it going, and then had staffing issues that we just couldn't pull it off because we needed the facility that we were going to place it. We weren't staffed enough, so we put it on the back burner until we could get there, and then when everything else started happening, and now we don't actually have space for one in one of our facilities because of separating or whatever. But yeah, that we definitely looked at that for the kids, because some of our kids do spend a year, 2 years. I think we had one kid spend almost 4 years in our facility, and they do need different programming. So that's on the wish list for something we'd like to do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Was anyone else seeking recognition? I didn't see anybody, so we will go back to the agency updates that's on the agenda, and I think AOC had an update, and so I would yield to AOC, and after AOC, if anyone else has an update, I'd be happy to recognize you. So
Sure. Thank you.
Please
So,
proceed.
I wanted to highlight a couple things from the AOC report. The first one being fair team outcomes as far as success rates, and then also member attendance. So there was a compilation conducted as far as number of complaints that the fair teams have reviewed. This year, thus far, they've reviewed 1,037 complaints, which puts us, I think, at a rate that would be higher than last year, which was at 1,932. Of those complaints, 58% were resolved outside the court, and 42% were referred to the court. So there's a good success rate from those fair team involvements. Other thing I wanted to highlight is the fair team attendance rates. That's been a focus. I think House Bill 3 had some references to fair team involvement. So there's been some efforts to try to increase the attendance of the members, and that's been through a partnership with the SEAC and the REAC. And with the partnership, the attendance from the REAC members has increased 70% for the year to date, and overall we're seeing audience participation or attendance increase from 2 to 8%. So there has been some movement and shift as far as the attendance, since that was a problem. And then there's also included within your materials a chart that gives a breakdown of the percentage of the of those folks that are part of the fair team and their attendance rates. And then also from a case planning end, the CDW program is beginning efforts to shift from a more of a compliance-based diversion agreement into a more of an individual case planning. The hopes being that this will allow the program to be more tailored toward each individual youth and help as far as their own individual goals and reduce recidivism. And there's pilots for the new case planning in 11 different locations: Madison, McCracken, Lincoln, Hopkins, Pulaski, Bell, Grayson, Trimble, McGoffin, Cumberland, Monroe, and Campbell. And then I've already made mention of the Mental Health Summit. It's also in the report, so there's references to that. And then lastly, also included in your materials is we're working through the implementation of House Bill 3. That's requiring some manual revisions and form changes, and then also updates to the fair team guidelines and training requirements. So that would include the school notifications regarding the diversion, use of the electronic platform for fair team members, 90-day requirement for the fair team action, guidance for AOCs, CDWs, and CDSs on parental cooperation, updating the CDW case management system, and then lastly, the openness and sealing of juvenile violent offender records, which was also included in House Bill 3. And piggybacking off that portion, we've, as our legal folks have been reviewing and working through the implementation, we've identified a couple matters as far as current statutes in which we have to, I think, have further discussion and dialogue as it relates to some conflicts that some of the statutes that we currently have in the books have with the openness and sealing of the records. But that's the ALC report. Anything from we do have several ALC folks here. Is there anything else to add there? I do want to acknowledge and recognize we have a new executive officer for our family and juvenile services, and that's Ashley Clark. She's sitting right here. She'll begin that role, I think, on June 16th. So excited to have her, and sad to see our current executive officer, Chris Brown, leaving. So just wanted to make mention of that as well. But Ashley's going to do a good job. She's got a background in juvenile justice, and she's been instrumental as we've been working through the implementation of Senate Bill 90. So I know the work product that she has, and she's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds, for the update. Is there any other agent? Senator Webb.
I just have a question. What was the criteria for your case plan pilots? And I just noticed you have one east of I-75 out of all those numbers.
Yes, I got Chris, do you want to speak on that? Or JR?
The reason we did that, one is Jefferson is left off intentionally because we have a staffing issue.
Microphone. Need you on the microphone. Sorry.
Well, two east of I-75. I see Bell now.
Can you hear me? Okay, so Jefferson County is intentionally left off that list because we're having some staffing issues there. Over 50% of our staff are currently down there, so we're wrapping some supports around them and don't want to throw them into that fire as of yet. The other 11 sites were merely picked because we have 12 supervisor regions within the CDW program. So we picked just one of those for each site, which would we feel would be a good example for the others.
Okay, but no other criteria, just
No,
not
just one
caseload, not judicial cooperation,
No,
nothing like that.
it's a variety of things. No,
Numbers.
there's nothing really concrete on that. It's just one per supervisor region.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Does any other agency have an update or anyone seek recognition? Oh, okay. Yes. If you introduce yourself, I'm sorry.
Good afternoon.
Ms. Weeder. Thank you.
Yes, Christina Weeder with the Department of Education. I'll just share briefly with the group that on Wednesday the SEAC did vote to create an ad hoc committee to sort of look at the implications of some language in Senate Bill 150 as far as the part about the parental consent for mental health and other well-being assessments, and specifically that language is prior to a well-being questionnaire or assessment or a health screening form being given to a child for research purposes, a school district shall provide students' parents with access to review the material and shall obtain parental consent. Parental consent shall not be general consent to these assessments or forms, but shall be required for each assessment or form. And so that really, we have already started to see that could have implications for the administration of the Youth Risk Behavior Survey or the Kentucky Incentive Tort Prevention Survey, which have been historically given in the schools. Obvious bullying prevention, sources of strength, Too Good for Drugs, or also some programming that are in schools that have a student pre and post assessment piece. And a lot of districts are actually looking at implementing universal mental health screeners. So those are things that we're just trying to kind of take stock of how that might be impacted by the legislation. And so the working group or the ad hoc committee will be kind of working to just identify all the areas that might be impacted by that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is anyone else seeking recognition? If not, thank you again, Commissioner and Secretary, for your presentation. Thank you to all the members for being here. Our next meeting will be on Tuesday, June the 20th at 1 o'clock, and it's a joint meeting with the Commission on Race and Access to Opportunity. So if there isn't any other business to come before the council, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you.